Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is starting his week-long trip to the United States, where he is scheduled to meet UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York and hold a bilateral meeting with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington. Now, Jaishankar and the Biden administration are expected to majorly focus on their discussion on COVID-related cooperation. The key meeting is to ensure that supply of raw materials from the US for manufacture of vaccine in India continues uninterrupted. India is likely to be one of the beneficiaries of the stock of vaccines US is willing to share with the world. The talks are expected to resolve around India's pitch to secure the unused vaccines, particularly AstraZeneca. New Delhi is also looking at joint production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine in collaboration with the US and India and ways to help manufacturers like Serum Institute of India boost production. Remember, the US Embassy had already clarified that the private sector production talks are underway between pharmaceutical companies in order to make this happen. According to the MEA brief, the External Affairs Minister will be having 2 interactions with business forums at the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum on Economic and Pandemic Relief between India and the US. And in recent weeks, both groups have formed a global task force on the pandemic response, along with the US Chamber of Commerce, to work on several aspects of pandemic relief. This includes the provision of 1,000 ventilators required by hospitals in India, 25,000 oxygen concentrators, and coordination of human resources executives in India and US for the effort. Now, other bilateral issues are also on the agenda. The leaders are expected to discuss resilient global supply chains, as well as the Indo-Pacific region in the backdrop of China's growing belligerence in the region. And the meeting is S. Jaishankar's first visit to US since new President Joe Biden assumed office in January. Remember, Jaishankar had met Blinken on the sidelines of the G7 foreign ministers meeting in London early this month and had interacted with the US Global Task Force on pandemic relief as well. Now, the Indian External Affairs Minister is also expected to make a stop at the United Nations, New York, to meet with Secretary General Guterres. Apart from discussing the COVID situation in India, the meet is expected to be in the backdrop of India joining the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member this year. They might also exchange views on Afghanistan peace talks and Israel-Palestine issue. And for more on this, now we're being joined by Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal. Thank you so much for joining us, Siddhant. What can you tell us about the key points on the agenda for the meet between Antony Blinken and S. Jaishankar?
Well, that meeting will happen later in the week. We know that already they have had their physical meeting, the first physical meeting in London on the sidelines of the G7 foreign ministers meeting. But nonetheless, it is a significant visit. The visit has already started. In fact, just few hours ago, the Indian External Affairs Minister landed in New York. And this visit has 2 components, the multilateral component and the bilateral component. The first, of course, is the multilateral component that has started with he reaching New York. And of course, he was welcomed by the Indian envoy to the United Nations. He, of course, as you pointed out, will be meeting the UN Secretary General. Will focus on many global issues, whether it's Israel-Palestine, whether it's the COVID crisis, whether it's the COVID vaccines as well. But by and large, his visit will be focusing on the COVID vaccine, something that India and US are working on. In fact, just before his visit, the groundwork has been laid by the Indian envoy to the US, Sandhu. He has, of course, been having a number of meetings, both physical with many congressmen and virtual meetings with the CEO of Moderna, with the chairperson of Johnson & Johnson. And remember, Johnson & Johnson plays a key role in the Quad COVID initiative, in which India has a role in terms of production, because these Johnson & Johnson vaccines will be produced here in India. It will be, of course, financed by US and will be given to many countries in the Indo-Pacific. So several things in this visit. Key, of course, is the COVID vaccine initiative and how the vaccines produced here in India can be given to the world.
Right. Siddhant, now there is, of course, like you mentioned, the question of boosting production capacity in India and maintaining supply chains uninterrupted. And like you also mentioned, he will be making a stop in New York to meet United Nations Antonio Guterres. Now, what can we expect on these fronts?
In terms of first, if you look at Washington, the Washington visit will be key in terms of the bilateral aspect of this relationship. India-US relationship is much celebrated. It has strengthened over last 20 years, and we know that how whether it is Trump administration or Biden administration, both have not only vouched for New Delhi but has said that the relationship with India is the most consequential relationship of this century. But COVID vaccine aside, it is Indo-Pacific, the Chinese aggressiveness that, of course, is expected to be discussed as always, given the fact that how Chinese aggressiveness has been the cause of concern for both New Delhi and Washington. But if we go back to New York, the visit, of course, has started. He will be there for 2 days. He will be not only just having a conversation with the UN Secretary General, but other diplomats as well. Remember, New York is again buzzing with activity after over a period of 1 year of lull because of COVID pandemic. And India is at the high table. India is, of course, being at the high table, giving its opinion, whether it's on Israel, Palestine. It is part of crucial committees as well, including the Taliban committee. So Afghanistan is another aspect that is part of both the multilateral conversation in New York or whether it's the bilateral conversation in Washington, given the fact that the Americans are expected to, of course, leave. And that vacuum can be used by Pakistan to again try to do something that they did in 1990s.
All right, Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us with all those input. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.